Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's APR webinar. My name is Shira Fischer. I'm a physician policy researcher working with APR, and the purpose of my talk is to demonstrate examples of how APR can help clients with related analyses to inform policy and practice. Share my slides. How the data we collect is fundamentally determines whether AI succeeds or fails in clinical practice. So today I'm going to discuss how we're at an interesting moment where there's tremendous excitement about AI in healthcare, but also a lot of disappointment when systems don't work as promised. And in my experience, that gap always comes down to data. Let's start by acknowledging both sides of the story. On the promise side, and these promises are real, AI has the potential to improve diagnostic accuracy, personalize treatment, catch diseases earlier, reduce the cognitive burden on clinicians, and even help us deliver more equitable care. But the reality check is that most AI models that look brilliant in development fail when deployed in actual clinical settings. And it's not because the algorithms are bad. It's because of the poor data quality, algorithmic bias, lack of integration with clinical workflows, regulatory uncertainty, and a trust gap among the clinicians who are supposed to use these tools. AI tools are proliferating in critical care, but these performance claims don't always lead to real-world benefit. The good news is these are solvable problems, but solving them requires us to get serious about the data. The question is no longer how can we build clinical AI, but how we use it safely and effectively. So what does optimizing actually mean? Optimization extends beyond accuracy metrics. So you can't just look at the AUC or the F-score. We often default to this model performance. But in clinical settings, optimization has to mean something broader. It has to mean better outcomes, lower burden, appropriate trust, and fewer unintended consequences. A model can be accurate and still make care worse. So when I say better outcomes, it's got to have measurable improvements for patients, clinicians, and healthcare systems. It has to have reduce burden, minimize unintended harm, and cognitive load on the care teams. We talked about trust a little bit, foster calibrated reliance, and equitable impact. Ensure the benefits and risks are distributed fairly across across populations. So the point is that optimization is multidimensional, not just accuracy. Of course, you have to start with data quality. A lot depends on the quality of the data, garbage in, garbage out. In healthcare AI, that principle applies more than ever. You can have the most sophisticated machine learning architecture in the world, but if your training data is incomplete or biased or poorly structured, your model will reflect those flaws. We definitely need complete, accurate, standardized clinical documentation, not just for billing, but structured in ways that machines can learn from, because AI optimizes what the data actually measure, not what we hope they represent. So if the labels are wrong, if the outcomes are proxies, if key variables are missing or mismeasured, the model may optimize for something that doesn't reflect clinical reality at all. But accuracy is not enough. We tend to think of data as something you feed into an algorithm, but data are also how we understand clinical work itself, how care actually happens, where the bottlenecks are, where decisions cluster, and where things go wrong. So accuracy relative to purpose, not just accuracy. Do we have enough data to learn from? Do we have enough volume? Is it representative? Is it enough for rare diagnoses and a variety of presentations? Timely, complete, and then governance. We have to think about privacy and consent and ethical frameworks for use. So those aren't obstacles to overcome. They're essential guardrails that build trust and ensure we're using data responsibly. So that's all to say that not all high quality data are fit for every purpose. What matters is whether the data are accurate for the decision being supported. And timeliness and context and clinical meaning often matter more than just completeness or cleanliness in the abstract. We have to think about the data before developing the model and deploying it. So think about which clinical processes benefit from AI intervention and what kind of intervention is appropriate for each case and place. So places where decisions are frequent and time pressured, where there's error or variation is high, and where action is possible are more promising for AI intervention. And the data can help us identify these good candidate use cases and what is needed in each case. And sometimes, to be honest, optimization means withdrawal. So if there's no measurable benefit or disproportionate harm, it may not be an appropriate case to use AI. Then once it's deployed, accuracy is, again, not just a score, but how is it working along the way? Who's using it, adoption, and who's not using it? Are there overrides? Are people working around it? Is there drift over time? People think about model drift, but also is the population changing? Is the frequency that was of the outcome or of the treatment or of other things changing from when the model was developed? And equity metrics as well. So optimization is an ongoing process, not a one-time decision. And it might not be saving time, but it might be reducing burden, or maybe it's not accurate, but not in ways that don't matter so much. So ongoing evaluation is critical and often doesn't happen if people just say, oh, it has a great accuracy score. So here's what actually happens with clinical data and all data before it can train an AI model. It starts with collection, so EHRs, imaging, labs, imaging, wearables, increasingly. And then the data has to be cleaned, deduplicated, correcting errors. And then integration, harmonizing data from different systems with different formats. And finally, labeling, having expert clinicians annotate the data to create ground truth. Each of these stages introduces potential for error, bias, and information loss. And these aren't abstract concerns. Missing data because a vital sign wasn't recorded during a busy shift, inconsistent coding because different institutions use different terminologies, measurement variability because devices aren't calibrated the same way, selection bias because certain populations are systematically underrepresented. So these challenges are real: missing data, inconsistent coding, and all of those things, and also privacy constraints, whether or not those have been considered. But these are the problems we need to solve if we want AI that actually works. So I want to spend a minute on bias because this is where data quality intersects with equality and ethics. So algorithmic bias isn't some abstract concern. It perpetuates and sometimes amplifies historical disparities in how we deliver care. So there are three types to think about. One is representation bias. So that is people are familiar when certain groups are underrepresented in the training data. So the classic example is dermatology AI, trained mostly on light skin tones, and then it performs less well on darker skin tones. But there's also measurement bias when our measurement tools themselves have differential accuracy. So for example, pulse oximetry, measuring the oxygen content of blood through a tool on the finger, for example, is less accurate for patients with darker skin. So if we're training AI on pulse ox data, we're taking that bias right into the model. And then label bias is perhaps the most insidious. This happens when historical treatment disparities show up in outcome labels. So pain assessment scores that were systematically lower for minority patients became the ground truth that the AI learns from. So those are some examples of these different kinds of biases that usually reflect historical disparities, and we can't fix that algorithmically. It has to be addressed at the data level. So putting it together, this is a life cycle that you can think about for data-driven AI optimization in clinical settings. You identify the use cases using data, you assess the data accuracy and fit for the use, deploy cautiously, and always thinking about governance and evaluation, monitoring continuously, tracking not just, again, accuracy, but adoption, overrides, drift, and equity, and then adjust, or if necessary, withdraw. AI in clinical care should be treated as a learning system, not a static product. This is true for any technology, but especially in healthcare. None of this happens in a vacuum. We need robust policy and governance frameworks. I think about this as four interconnected domains. So there's regulatory compliance. So this is HIPAA, FDA oversight, increasingly the EU AI Act, and a patchwork of state level privacy laws. This landscape is evolving rapidly, and staying compliant requires ongoing attention. Then there's institutional oversight, so IRB review of research, data governance committees to manage access, clinical validation requirements before deployment. Those aren't bureaucratic hurdles, those are quality controls. And then patient rights, informed consent that's actually understandable, and the option to not have your data involved is not usually an option for people. Data access, so patients know what's being collected about them. Right to explanation for AI-driven decisions, and opt-out mechanisms for having your data included in research or AI in general. Again, that's not usually given in informed consent. Often you have no choice if you're getting care other than having your data included. And lastly, clinical integration. So continuous monitoring after deployment, clinician feedback loops so frontline providers can report when something doesn't seem right and making it easy for them to do that, and regular performance audits. There are a number of organizations involved, non-governmental, working on standardizing some of this. So there's CHAI, which is the Coalition for Health AI, for health artificial intelligence. There's the Health AI Partnership. There's URAC and JCO, which is the Joint Commission, and they all work on monitoring. They have guidance on data quality monitoring, transparency across the AI lifecycle. URAC and JCO have accreditation and certification standards. They embed expectations for AI oversight, safety, and accountability into their existing quality and governance structures. So together, these efforts signal a shift from voluntary best practices towards institutionalized governance, where health systems are expected to demonstrate not just that AI tools perform well, again, that accuracy, but they are responsibly deployed, monitored, and governed over time. But there still is a voluntary component since none of this is legally required, and a political component about who's on the right side of who and which institutions, which of these organizations are viewed favorably. That makes it quite complicated. So when we think about standards, I always think about this XKCD cartoon, how standards proliferate. Situation, there are 14 competing standards. 14, ridiculous. We need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone's use cases. Yeah, soon situation. There are 15 competing standards. So making standards is not easy. If you get everyone on board, that would be great, but doesn't usually happen. But thinking about standardizing. So where do we go from here? Let me leave you with a few priorities. First, investing in data infrastructure. So interoperable EHR systems. We're making some progress on that, but not just within a health system, but across health systems. Common data models like OMOP and PCORNet that allow us to conduct research across institutions, and data quality dashboards that give us real-time visibility into whether our data is fit for the purposes that we're using it for. Second, it's important to have multidisciplinary teams. AI in healthcare can't be just a technical exercise. You need clinicians who understand the clinical context, data scientists who understand the methods, and ethicists who can identify potential harms. Patient advocates are also really important to include in the design process from the beginning, and policy experts who can navigate the regulatory landscape. Third, we need to embrace transparency, open validation data sets that others can test their models against. There's also model cards that document limitations, not just performance metrics, though they're often not detailed enough to be able to use to really evaluate a tool. And public reporting of performance metrics, how these systems perform in the real world, including failures. And what we're seeing next is multimodal data. So that takes us beyond just EHR data or claims or labs to images, waveforms, patient-generated data, operational components like the day of the week and location in the hospital, and voice and mobile phone data. The promise is obvious, a richer picture of the patient and the care context, and more to feed into the AI. But multimodal data don't automatically make AI better. They actually can make it harder to understand what the model is responding to. And each modality has its own accuracy issues, its own biases, its own privacy issues, and patterns of missingness. So we have to think about all of that when we're including this varied data in our AI models. So what are the key takeaways? First, optimization is about use, not accuracy or novelty. Next, AI is only as good as the data it learns from. We can't algorithm our way out of bad data. Data quality, representativeness, and governance are foundational. Third, continuous monitoring and validation are essential. Deployment isn't the end point, it's the beginning of ongoing quality assurance. And fourth, success requires collaboration across clinical, technical, and policy domains. No single discipline can solve this alone. How can APR support organizations who are thinking about deploying AI and want to evaluate it? We can validate AI systems. We can help you plan AI tool implementation, taking all of these important things into account. And we can evaluate the impact of new or existing tools. We're here to help. Again, my name is Shira Fischer. Thank you for joining us for this webinar with APR, and please be in touch.